But it's okay. We don't have to worry about it. It's just I like to see what's coming. Let's open with one wish you wish to do.
Got your hands.
There we go.
We're going to sing out with all that we got. Sing to Jesus, so let's lift our voice together.
Also, check your head just
Sing your word. Your word is a lamp unto my feet, and your way is the only way for me. It's a narrow road that leads to life, but I want to be on it. Come on, sing that again. It's a narrow road, the mercy's wide. You're good on your promise. I take you at your word. If you said it, I believe it. I've seen how good it works. If you started, you'll complete it. I take you at your word.
It's all two.
Well, you spoke, and the chaos fell in line. 'Cause I know, 'cause I've seen it in my life.
Start a rack out.
Narrow road that leads to life, but I want to be on it. It's a narrow road and the tide is high, but you're part of the water. I take you at your word. If you said it, I believe it. I've seen how good it works. You started, you'll complete it. I take you at your word. You said it, I believe it. I've seen how good it works. You started, you'll complete it. I take you at your word. You're good on your promise.
Going on. Ready to resolve two.
Come on, sing this out. You said your love will never give up. You said your grace is always enough. You said your heart would never forget or forsake me. And you said I'm saved. You call me yours. You said my future's full of your hope. You never fail, so I know that you'll never fail me. Come on, sing that again. You said your love will never give up. You said your grace is always enough. You said your heart would never forget or forsake me. And you said your grave, you call me yours. You said my future's full of your hope. You never fail, so I know that you'll never fail me. I take you at your word. You said it, I believe it. I see how good it works. You started, you'll complete it. I take you at at your word. You said it, I believe it. I've seen how good it works.
That'll work, Mark. Ready,
You started, you'll complete it. I take you at your word. You're good on your promise. You're good on your promise.
Morning, church. Hope you're doing well. Stay standing. We're going to keep singing here in just a moment. But I just want to take a second and brag on our church just for a little bit. Next Sunday will be my 9-year anniversary being here at Rocky. And that's not it. Sorry, that came out like a humble brag. That's not, that was the setup. Just to say this, that in my 9 years here, every single year here at the Fred campus, our generosity has increased every single year. Isn't that awesome? I love that.
You can put the giving thingy.
And I just wanted to remind us, as a church, that when you get this, because of how you steward your finances and the stuff that God's blessed you with, when you see something that's valuable, you want to be a part of it, right? You want to be an investor in it. And I just want you to know that there's so many stories that are happening around here through that are able to happen because so many of you choose to be generous towards God's church. So I just want to say thanks for that. And I bumped into a story last week. I just thought it was a really cool story. I want to share it with you. Our student ministry here, who's led by Matt McDonald, been on staff here for 6 months, doing a great job. And so he started essentially this deal on Wednesdays here at the Fred campus where he cooks for high school kids. And so he just opens up the lobby. Some of you are a part of that. You help cook or you're here to serve. And so it's just Wednesday lunch. That's what it's called. So we got a bunch of Frederick High School kids who come over, and sometimes they do pizza or quesadillas. And I love the word church. It's just creating a place for our high school kids to go, hey, if you just want to come and have a free lunch and hang out, and some of those kids hang out for a while, and it's fun to go down and chat with them a little bit. And I think some of them skip school after that. But anyway, but they're just here, and I love that. And so we just believe as a church, we want our community to be better. And so that's just one of the ways that we can help, make this community better for high school kids. And so anyways, there was a dad who walked in here a couple weeks ago, and he's not even part of our church, but he just heard that his kid, through an invitation, was coming here to grabbing lunch. And he just thought that was so cool. And so he walked into our building 2 weeks ago. And he said, hey, I just want you to know I love that your church is doing this. I just think this is great, and that you're creating this space for, high school kids to come. And he says, I just want to make sure you guys keep doing it. And he wrote a check for $1,000. Isn't that cool? Listen, I don't even know if he knows Jesus, but he gets this idea. It's like, hey, I want to be a part of this. I want to make sure it keeps going. And so this is so great that your church would offer a free lunch to high school kids in our community. So here you go. Here's that. And so I just want you to know that because he did that, he is now part of that environment. You know that. He's part of that. He's a giver here. He's a part of this, whether he realizes or not. And if you give here, you're a part of every single story that's happened around this place. Because somebody who's walked in today for the very first time and experiencing church, you're a part of that. We're about to have somebody get baptized this morning. You're a part of that. You get to be a part of everything. And so we don't always talk about the idea of generosity as an act of worship, but it is. When we choose to be obedient and steward what God has given to us, you get to be a part of everything that's happening around here. So thanks so much. Thanks so much for being a part of that. Let's celebrate this baptism that's about to happen, and let's continue to worship together.
Ready, one?
1, 2.
Solve one.
Intro.
Nice,
2.
two. Thank you.
3.
He is in.
Mom's climbing.
All right, great.
Verse 1, 2.
Started recording. Ready, Bab?
Remember those walls that we called sin and shame? They were like prisons that we couldn't escape.
Ready, Bab?
But he
And
came and he died and he rose. Those walls are rubble now.
One, we'll come back to you.
Verse 2, 2, 3, 4.
Remember those giants we called death and grave?
And the crowd goes, trial.
They were like
Ready,
prisons
one.
that stood in our way, but he came and he died and he rose. Those giants are dead now.
Ready, two. Solve two.
Come on, sing this out. This is our God. This is who he is. He loves us.
Grandma
This
ran.
is our God. This is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross, beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim. This is our God, King Jesus.
Keep hitting, right? Ready, two. Solve two.
Remember that fear that took our breath away.
Two, let's switch, right?
Faith so weak that we could barely pray. But he heard every word, every whisper. Now those altars in the wilderness
Solve two.
tell the story of his faithfulness. Never once did he fail,
Solve
and
one.
he never
Turn the rack out, two down. Go ahead.
This is our
Left,
God.
one, ready,
This is
two.
who he is. He loves
Solve
us. This is our God. This is what he does. He saves us.
Ready, two. Ready,
On
one.
the cross, beat the
We got
grave.
you here.
Let heaven and earth proclaim. This is our God.
Go back to
King
that.
Jesus.
Yeah, just ready, two.
Who pulled me
Solve
out
two.
of that pit? He did, he did. Who paid for all of our sin? Nobody but Jesus. Who pulled me out of that pit? He did,
Yeah,
he
keep heading right, two.
did.
Ready, one.
Who paid for all of our
Reset,
sin?
sorry.
Nobody but Jesus.
Okay, ready,
Who rescued me from that grave? Yahweh, Yahweh. Who gets the glory and praise?
Right,
Nobody
right,
but
one, ready.
Jesus. Who rescued me from that grave? Yahweh, Yahweh.
Ready, one.
Who gets
Hit
the
it right,
glory and praise?
Ready, one.
Nobody but Him.
Solve
This
one.
is our God. This is who He is. He loves us. This is our God. This
Ready,
is what He
two.
does.
Keep going,
He
keep one. Turn
saves
it back out. One, ready,
us.
two.
He bore the cross, beat the grave.
Nice. Done.
Let heaven and earth proclaim. This is our
Ready,
God, King
Solve one.
Jesus.
Solve one.
He bore the cross, beat the grave. Let heaven and earth
Up and let it run
proclaim. This is our God, King Jesus.
Ready, one. Switch the seat. Ready, one. Solve one.
This is our King.
Two, we're gonna switch to Miranda.
Intro.
Ready,
2,
two.
3, 4.
Let's keep singing together. Let's focus our attention on Jesus.
Ready, two.
Verse 1, 2,
Solve two.
3,
Your
4.
creation suddenly articulate.
Let's just go ahead.
The
Cover it as tight as you can under the chin and
tongues
hold the shot.
lift one cry. Then from
Yeah,
north to
that'll work
south
one. Just hold it.
and east to west, we'd hear Christ be magnified.
Ready, one.
Verse
Solve
2.
one.
Drums in.
Where the whole earth echoing his eminence, and
Okay, let's
his
grab
name
like Parker or
would
something.
burst
Ready,
from
two.
sea and
Here you go. Ready,
sky.
two. Solve two. One. Let's have you come in on Miranda.
Rivers to
Oh, you got a tighter
the
shot. Ready, one.
mountaintops, we'd hear
Wait, just a
Christ
second.
be magnified.
Okay, ready, one. Solve one.
4. Chorus. All in.
Singing, oh, Christ be magnified.
Let's have
Just
you
let his praise
come
arise.
down a little bit.
Christ be
Good job,
magnified.
Hold that shot.
Singing, oh,
sing Christ be magnified.
It's all
Be
two.
lifted high, oh, singing, oh, Christ be magnified. Just let His praise arise. Christ be magnified in me. Singing, oh, Christ be magnified from the altar of my life. Christ be magnified in me.
Right here. Ready, two. Dissolve, two. Let's rack out one.
Drums in.
Now we won't do it, right?
Yeah, that's all right. We're
Interlude. 2, 3, 4.
Let's pray these words together. That our thoughts, that our hearts will be focused on Jesus. Sing, I won't bow to idols.
Bridge 1, 2,
Ready,
3,
one.
4.
And I won't
Dissolve,
bow to idols and
guys are
stand strong and
magnificent.
worship you.
Marvelous.
And if it puts me in the fire, I'll rejoice 'cause you're there too. And I won't be formed by feelings. I'll hold fast to what is true. 'Cause if the cross brings transformation, you can't hang me there with you. 'Cause death is just a doorway into resurrection life. And if I join you in your suffering, then I'll join you when you rise. And when you return in glory with all the angels and the saints, my heart will still be singing. My song will be the same. Oh, Christ be magnified. Just let His praise arise. Christ be magnified in me. Singing, oh, Christ be magnified from the altar of my life. Christ be magnified in me. Singing, oh, Christ be magnified. Just let His praise arise. Christ be magnified in me. Singing, oh, Christ be magnified from the altar of my life. Christ be magnified in me.
ready, two. Dissolve, two.
Bam. 2, 3, 4.
Amen. Isn't that good? You guys can go ahead and have a seat.
Sorry.
It's okay. He already got a title earlier.
What are some things
I
that
just
you
have to
guys
go in
do
and start
in your
this
life that help you remember things?
Here's the community.
You know, nowadays, we have our cell phones. I say something to my watch, and it'll, ping me 30 minutes later or whatever. It'll remind me of something that I need to do. Or, a lot of us, I'll be like, hey, Shelby, will you remind me tomorrow to go do this thing? And she's always like, just write it down. Just, put it in your reminders, that whole thing, too. Remember this thing. I remember when I was in college, I didn't have a smartphone yet. And I would have sticky notes, and I would put them everywhere. On the mirror, in my car, on my keys, on my guitars, wherever. That thing to make me remember to bring that paper, or to bring that note, or to do that thing. We're constantly doing stuff to help us remember things. We're constantly doing stuff to remind us to do things, or to remind us to go have a conversation, to remind us to remember things. And that's one of the things that I love about our services on Sunday. I think the service as a whole, our time together, is a time to remember Jesus, to refocus on Him, to put our attention back on Him. But our time taking communion together is especially that. It's a time for us to pull out that sticky note and to put it on this service, to say, hey, remember specifically what Jesus did. Remember that He died on a cross for our sin, for our shame. It's what we've been singing about all morning so far. But remember that He rose again and He is alive, and we are alive with Him, which is incredible, incredible news. And something that we need to be reminded of, because as incredible as the news is, I don't know about you, it's something that can kind of drift over time. So as one church today, we're going to take communion, the bread and the juice, to remember Jesus. So when you're ready, take the bread,
so
take
quit
the
whining.
juice. Let's focus
So
on
don't freak
Jesus
out
today.
when it's
Ready, ready,
paused.
CG. And dissolve CG.
Is that a comedian joke? Quit whining.
That was quite clever. It was a reach, but quite clever. And
It was a dad joke.
yeah, it was. You're right. We'll come back out to 2.
Our sermon key should be set.
Yep, got it.
Sick.
Ready to. And dissolve
God, we
to.
praise you for what you've done for us.
Screen. Good job.
And
God, I
actually-
thank you for this time that we have to come together
Thank
to
you for the reminder.
continue to remember that, but God, know that that's not the end of the story. God, that you are moving and working right now in our lives,
All right.
and God, in the lives of everybody here and the lives of people who love you all around the world. And so, God, I pray that today, God, our hearts will be open to you, to what you have to say to us. God, I pray that, God, we're willing to listen. God, we thank you so much for who you are. It's in your powerful and holy name that we pray. Amen.
Ready.
And go stream.
Amen, man. I don't know about you at the
was
Frederick campus, but
second
worship
late.
here was good, man. You guys were on it, ready to go, and
All
yeah,
right,
you
guys.
can clap
See
for
you in a
that.
few.
Frederick campus, good to have you guys with us.
Great
Everybody
job.
online, great to have you. We are wrapping up a series today, and I'll be honest, I'm excited about this one, and I'll just kind of put it out there. I think we're going to get into some stuff. Like, I think we're going to get into some stuff today that every single person in here, no matter what your age is, you need it. You need to hear it. And it's not surprising because we're doing a series, wrapping up a series called The Talk, where Jesus kind of has like the most important conversations that he has in 3 years with his disciples in one night. Passover meal is 24 hours before he's going to be arrested, crucified, and buried in a tomb. And he says, guys, if I could wrap up the last 3 years, I just want to share this with you. And it's some big stuff. And we're going to talk about what he wraps up with. He kind of wraps up with the idea of looking at his disciples and saying, hey, if you're a follower of me, here's what's going to happen. It's going to change how you love. It's going to change how you act. It's going to change how you live in relationships. It's going to change how you treat people who are different than you. And you're just going to kind of stand out because of that. And because of that, you're going to be different and you're not going to fit in, which we all hate, right? When I was in 8th grade, I remember we moved from Southern California to north to Oregon. I moved into the Portland, Oregon area, just a little bit west in the suburbs. And when I was in Southern California, I think most of you know my background. I'm a pastor's kid. And so I kind of grew up coming to church like this since the day I was born. And there's just a little bit of that Christian bubble that goes along with that, being a pastor's kid. And then not only did I grow up as a pastor's kid, when I lived in Southern California, my dad, the church he worked at, had a school. And so it was a Christian school. So not only did I go to church all the time, but also went to a Christian school all the time. So there was a little bit of this kind of Christian cultural bubble that I lived in. And I'll just have to be honest, there was a lot of the world cultural stuff that I just didn't run into as much as other kids who might have been in public school, that kind of thing. But when we moved to Oregon, I went right into a public school. It was great, man. I was excited about, bigger sports programs, more kids to hang out with. But I noticed as soon as I walked in that, wow, there's a little bit of some things that I don't quite understand, that I just haven't been introduced to before and don't know how I react to. And I remember there was one little situation. Do you guys have those moments in your life like this that have kind of marked you? Like, you remember this happened, and you even have some reactions to certain things because of what you experienced in that one moment. I'll give you the example. So 8th grade, second semester, we moved, right? So everybody's been to school together, for like 7 months. I walk into my class, and I remember it was the first week of class. It wasn't the first day, but it was one of the first week. And the teacher was doing something like an exercise in class that you would normally do like in the first week of school. Kind of the get to know you stuff. And I don't know if she was doing it because I was new or what, but she was going around and she was just going up and down the rows. And she was like, okay, let's just get to know each other a little more outside of class. And so, hey, Derek, how about you share with us, like, what your favorite food is? And you know, like when you get called out in a class, it's like, oh my gosh, right? You know, you just start sweat a little bit. What are they going to ask me? And I'm like, bring on the favorite food. I love barbecue, right? I mean, that's easy. Then there was a question like, what's your favorite sports? And I'm going like, right here, call me, because that's an easy question. She wasn't calling everybody, just a few. And I just knew for some reason in my mind that day, there was going to be a question that was asked that I wouldn't know how to answer. And there was. And she asked the question. Before I tell you what the question was, let me tell you how I felt. Have you ever been up to Rocky Mountain National Park, right? Or wherever you go hiking, and you like have been hiking, and you come up to one of those cliffs. I'm not a heights guy, but you walk up and you like look over and your stomach does that like flip thing. Like that is exactly what I felt like in this moment, because she looks at me and she says, Sean, it's so good to have you in class. We're so excited to have you here. Hey, help us get to know you. What's your favorite band? And for some of you guys, you're like, bring it on, man. I'll tell you like 5 of my favorite bands and all the different kind of genres of music. But guys, remember, I lived in this like little Christian bubble when I was growing up, and I wasn't going to say Striper, you know. Some of you know Christian heavy metal, you know, little To Hell with the Devil, In God We Trust. Yeah, that's I listened to a little bit of that, but I wasn't going to say that. And so I'm racking my brain like, I don't even know what I would say that's going to fit in with all these kids. And so I just said the first thing that came to mind. All right, some of you laugh at this, right? Remember, this is like early 90s, all right? So I said Milli Vanilli. Exactly. Like, I don't know if you laughed at Fred, but everybody here just busted up laughing. And here's what happened in the class. Everybody busted up laughing. Now, guys, they were popular. The only reason I knew their name is because, like, 3 weeks before, they'd won a Grammy. Like, you know, I can't even remember the song right now, but they won a Grammy for something, like for a whole album. Girl, you know it's true. There it is. Ooh, 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 I love you. There you go. All the young people are like, oh my word, this is our pastor. Yeah. So I said it, everybody busts up laughing, and the reason they bust up laughing is because Milli Vanilli got busted. Like, you might remember this, like their entire album, they had like lip synced the whole thing. It wasn't even them. And so everybody in the whole class is busting up laughing at me, and I'm going, just sweating like crazy, turning 12 shades of red like my shirt, right? And I have no idea. And the teacher kind of does the, you know, oh, guys, it's all right. Kind of rolls her eyes and like, Sean, thanks, that's great. And then next question, move on. And guys, there was a moment there, I realized really quickly that no matter how hard I was going to try in this class, in this moment, I was different. And because I was different, I did not fit in. Like every kid in that class was like, whoa, that kid doesn't know much about culture, right? And then I stood out because of that. And what's interesting in the moment in John 13 through 16 with the disciples is Jesus looks at the disciples and says, guys, it's going to kind of be that drastic. Like if you try to live my lifestyle, like guys, we've talked about this for like 3 years. We've talked about how we're going to love. We talked about how we're going to treat people differently. It's going to be a different culture that you're going to live. And here's the thing, if you live this culture, if you live this lifestyle, what's going to happen in your life is you are going to stand out. And you're going to stand out because you don't fit in. And he says, here's what's going to happen. What you're going to face is you're going to face persecution because you don't fit in and you stand out. Now, here's the reality of all of what Jesus is saying to the disciples. We said early on in this series, we said, guys, here's the deal. I think if Jesus was to stand up here and talk to us today, he'd have a very similar talk with us that he had with his disciples. So what Jesus would probably stand up here and say to us today is say, hey, if you're a follower, if you're a true follower of me, if you're going to love the way I love, if you're going to stand out for the values that I stand out for, if you're going to do relationships like this, if you're going to value the things that I say is really true, here's what's going to happen, is you will stand out. And not only will you stand out, you're going to stand out because you don't fit in, and what you're going to face because of it is persecution. Now, it's interesting. There's a lot of you that sit there today and say, hey, we live in America. We don't face persecution. I get it, but stick with me. John chapter 15, Jesus says to his disciples, he says it this way, and understand where they are. I mean, these guys are in the spot of they realize that the religious leaders have kind of looked at Jesus and said, hey, we're going to take you out. And what they understand is they don't understand exactly how it's going to happen, But they know Jesus had said he's going to die. And what's going on in their mind is they're going, if Jesus is going to die, he says this, then they're probably going to do the same things to Jesus or to us that they say they're going to do to Jesus. And so our heads are on the line too. So there's just kind of this dark cloud over the room. And Jesus just acknowledges it. He says this, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world. But I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you. A servant is not greater than his master, that if they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obey my teaching, they will also obey your teaching. They will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who has sent me. Jesus looks at his disciples and says, guys, here's the deal. I'm God. John 14, he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. What Jesus was saying is, I am God in human form. And here's the deal. You know that because you've seen the miracles I've done, man. I've healed people. I've raised people from the dead. You guys have seen all of that stuff. And here's the thing. If I'm as perfect as I am, if I've got as much power as I've got, and they still are going to persecute me, how do you think they're going to treat you any differently? Like Jesus is very clear with his disciples. He says, anything that they can do to me, they're going to be willing to do to you. And here's the crazy thing for the disciples, the crazy truth they're going to run into really quickly, is they're going to run into the reality of what Jesus is saying is actually true. I mean, they're going to be persecuted. They're going to be beaten. They're going to be whipped. Peter's going to be crucified upside down. There's multiple other, actually all of the disciples except John are martyred for their faith. I mean, the reality of this is they're going to stand out for being different, right? They're not going to fit into society, and society doesn't like it when you're different and you don't fit in. So what happened to the disciples is they faced persecution. And the reality for us, Jesus says, is it will be no different from you. You will face persecution. Now, I get it. Like there's 50 of you sitting in this room, there's 50 of you sitting in that room that are going, yeah, we face persecution. The rest of us are going, I don't know if we really face persecution. Like, think about this for a second. How many of you have been beaten for your faith? Like, anybody been clubbed for their faith? Like, raise your hand. Anybody been strapped to a post and been like whipped for your faith? Anybody like that? Has anybody in here, anybody at the Frederick campus, or anybody online, have you ever been thrown in jail, starved? Have you been incarcerated because of your faith? Anybody? Anybody ever been stoned? Not that kind of stone, but some of you have, right? Yeah. I'm talking about something different, right? The reality is there's probably like few, if any. Like maybe we got a couple missionaries in the room. They're like, yeah, I face it. But the reality is, in our country, in America, we don't see people being physically persecuted for their faith. But Jesus said there's a reality that you will face persecution because of your faith. Now, some people will just get way out there and be like, well, it's coming. Like, it's coming. I'm talking about right now. And the reality is this, maybe what we would do better at is changing the word from persecution to opposition. Because I think there's a whole lot of people that have actually faced some opposition in simple ways because of their actual faith. And Jesus says that's the reality of what's actually going to happen. If you don't buy persecution, maybe let's talk opposition. But here's the deal. If you're one of those that are saying, well, we don't face persecution, I don't even know if we really face opposition. Here's the deal. Persecution doesn't always have to be physical. Like Jesus says this in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. He said, blessed are you when people insult you, when people persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. What Jesus categorizes persecution there is not physical, but it's verbal. It's when people, he says, when people insult you or when people say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Persecution doesn't have to just be physical. And I'll be honest, I might be in a more prominent Christian position as a pastor who stands up here and teaches, but I can tell you, man, I face opposition. And there is opposition because we get up there and share some things and we talk about truth in Scripture. And there's constant opposition that comes. Honestly, there is opposition that comes from outside the church and inside the church. Of pushing back and saying, I don't agree with this, or I'm angry about this, or I've had some accusations made, or some things that actually have been malicious, that have been untrue. And I think there are some of us that we say, yeah, I have faced some things, some opposition because of my faith. Now, if you're a student in the room, let me ask you this. Think about opposition this way. Have you ever not been invited to things because of your faith? Has there ever been anything in your life that you felt like, man, my faith actually keeps some of my friends from feeling just normal around me? And so because they don't feel normal around me, they don't invite me to the same things. I remember growing up. Now, I did say I grew up in a Christian bubble for sure, but I remember moving to Oregon. I remember getting invited to a lot of pickup games, a lot of sports things, a lot of other things, but not getting invited to a lot of parties. And there might be some of you that say, yeah, I faced that. There might be some of you young ladies that say, yeah, I'm a young adult. I mean, it's been really hard to find a guy. And I think if I went a little softer on my convictions, it'd be a whole lot easier to find a guy. Might be some of you as adults that say, I've been passed over for some things. Or maybe because I haven't been willing to be as cutthroat as other people and sacrifice my integrity, maybe I wasn't awarded the same things that some of the other people in our organization were willing to do and they received. Like there are some times where we look at opposition a little bit different and we say, well, it's not necessarily physical persecution, but it's some opposition because of our faith. Some of you have experienced that in your family. As soon as you became a Christian, somebody in your family went, what? You're one of those people? And we automatically disagree on all these different things. So you began to be mistreated. Man, I know some people in our church and know some people throughout our ministry that actually lost their family, not because of anything they did, but just because they accepted Christ and now they weren't welcome in their family anymore. And Jesus even said in Scripture, he said, the reality of my coming is it will bring a sword that will divide families. And he wasn't saying, I'm coming to be violent and divide families. He was saying the reality of my teaching, the reality of the lifestyle that I'm asking you to live, the reality of the truth that some people don't want to hear will divide families. And some of you have experienced that. And while that may not be physical persecution, it is opposition to your faith. So the reality is that persecution doesn't always have to be physical. Here's another reality, though. When you think about the idea of persecution, or we could use opposition, another reality about our faith would be this, is if you're no different from the culture, you will face no opposition from the culture. Like there's a lot of Christians who would sit in here and say, well, I don't face persecution. I don't face opposition. Man, life's pretty easy for me, and I don't face anything out there. And while I'm not saying that every person who lives a Christian life is going to face opposition, I am saying if you don't face any opposition anywhere, if nobody ever disagrees with you, if there's no difference from you in your life and the culture, then you're not going to face any opposition. Like if your life doesn't resemble Jesus enough that it causes people just to pause and question and say, what's different than that? Ask some questions, maybe even push back sometime. You're probably not quite living the style of Christianity that God asks us to live. You see, we live in a culture that functions on a value of conformity. I mean, think about this for a moment. Who are the people that kind of get hit in our culture? The people who stand out for being a little bit different. You won't get hit in our culture if you don't stand out for being different. Our culture functions on conformity. Like if you fit in, if you just kind of take what the culture says about relationships, about sexuality, you want to choose any issue out there, man, basically what happens is the world says, you're good. You're all good. But as soon as you kind of stand out as being different, something else happens. Jesus said in John 15:19, we already read it, but let me read it again. This is how conformity works with the world. He says, if you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. And if I just stop for just a second and just say this, part of the problem with the church, part of the problem that the church is not reaching more people is because it's not standing out as different. And what we have is we have too many cultural Christians of all ages that have faith. We have faith in Jesus, and we come to church, but there's nothing that changes our life to look any different than anyone else the other 6 days of the week. And Jesus looked at his disciples, and he didn't say, hey guys, here's what I want you to do. I want you to believe in me, and we're going to kind of spread this thing by just kind of fitting in and loving people. He did say we're going to spread this thing by loving people. But he said the way we're going to love people is going to be so different that the reality is you will not fit in. And the reality will be some of the values that we have, some of the things that we do, some of the things that we come together and worship, and a lot of the world's not doing that. There's a lot of Christians that aren't doing that. But the reality that we have in our day, especially in a country that faces no persecution, because if you're going to be a Christian in Africa, if you're going to be a Christian in China, if you're going to be a Christian in Indonesia, you are a Christian. Like, you're stepping up and standing out, because we have missionaries that we are talking to and connecting with in all kinds of different places. We have some in India that we've been talking to and looking at maybe possible partnerships. They email us like numerous times a year and say, man, another person on our staff lost their life because of their faith. Would you pray for us? Our leader is in hiding right now because there are people, there's money out for his life. You're going to be a Christian in those places. There's no cultural Christianity. Like, you're going to step up and do it. And what Jesus didn't call his disciples to was cultural Christianity. What he didn't call us to was cultural Christianity. He didn't call us to be crazy Christians. We'll talk about that in a minute. But he called us to be different. And when we are different, we will not fit in, and we will stand out. John 15, verse 19, Jesus says, if you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. But then he says, as it is, you do not belong to the world. But I have chosen you out of the world. You see, we are in the world physically, but we are not to be of the world spiritually. There's a different side of us that we belong to a different place. So the values that we have ought to be of that place. Doesn't mean that we don't interact with the world. Doesn't mean that we don't have friends in the world. Doesn't mean that we don't love people. It doesn't mean we isolate ourselves. It just means that there's something identifiable about your life. There's something identifiable about your life. There's something identifiable about my life that causes us to stand out for being a little different. You see, what Jesus asked his disciples to do was to pick up their cross, to deny themselves, to pick up their cross. Reminder that when Jesus picked up his cross, he died. He was saying it's going to cost them. He reminded them to be imitators of his love and his grace. He said that kind of life is going to be a standout life. Now, he also said that kind of life is going to cause some division. It will cause some to avoid you. It will cause some to want to silence you. I mean, that's not just going on in our culture today. It was going on with the disciples. But one way or another, it will be recognizable to Jesus and to the world. Here's what Jesus says about cultural Christians. And just let me say this, but let me just hear it correctly. Jesus says this in Matthew 10, 32 and 33. He says, whoever acknowledges me before others, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. Now hear this with grace and with truth. If the world can't identify you as a Christian, Jesus is saying, maybe I can't either. See, what Jesus has called us to do is to live a stand-out life, not a fit-in life. He's called us to live a stand-out life and to be different. And honestly, guys, that's part of what causes opposition. Because Jesus, being the most loving person that ever came to this earth. And remember, who did Jesus really get ticked off with? It wasn't the people that he disagreed with as far as they weren't people who followed his way. He disagreed with the religious people. He always got angry at the religious people. He didn't get angry at the world. He didn't get angry with the person who didn't agree with him on relationships and on marriage and on this and that, all the different. He didn't get mad at those people. He got mad at the religious people. But what happened is Jesus' lifestyle of love caused people to make a decision. And there's a reality with a Christian person, not a cultural Christian, but a person who lives Jesus' lifestyle, that their life, their love, their grace, their living truth, and the balance of grace, all of that will actually, without even saying a word, sometimes cause a person who is not a follower of Jesus to make a decision to either pull toward them or push away from them. Sometimes the lifestyle of Jesus highlights in another person's life the things about their own life and their own values that they don't actually like and do not know how to articulate, so they push away. And you're a student, you've seen this. You've seen it where you're trying to live as, but you're losing some friends because they just don't want to identify that, or they know that if I identify with that, I'm going to stand out from the crowd and I'm going to be labeled as different. And right now, the best thing for me to do is be able to conform to a group. You see, we live Jesus' lifestyle. It demands a decision for people. And what God calls us to be is he calls us to be people who stand out for our faith. And so here's what we've got to ask the question then. If the reality is that we're just going to we're going to run into these issues and we're going to stand out. If we're going to run into these issues and we really live for Jesus, we're going to actually not fit into our culture. And Jesus wants us to stand, then what does it look like? That's the big question. What does it actually look like to be a person who stands out for their faith? Because I think where the reality really gets tough is for a lot of us as Christians, we feel like standing out is actually about things that Jesus would look at us and say, I don't know if that's actually right. I don't know if you're actually standing out for the right things. You know, I go back to that early upbringing years, and I'm super thankful for my family. I grew up in a very loving home. I grew up with mom and dad that were together. I grew up with a dad and mom that taught me about faith. I am super thankful for that. But here's what I would say is I grew up in a little bit of a Christian bubble, and of no doing from my parents' own, but more from mine, maybe my personality. I've said this before, that I grabbed on more to the law of faith than I did to the love of faith. More to the things of the Old Testament that go into like, here's the law, here's the 10 Commandments, here's all the laws that God's given, and not exactly to the grace. Because if you really realize what the gospel was, like Jesus stepped up and what he began to teach was not, hey, here's the 613 laws that were created for the Jews in the Old Testament in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Like there's 613 of them. And hey, all you Gentile people that aren't Jewish, you got it. No, Jesus said, hey, that's for the Jews. And this Old Testament thing that we've got, man, it tells the beautiful history and story of all the things. But guys, if I stood up here and said, hey guys, hey, no tattoos because it's in the Bible. Hey, no this. Guy down front's like, oh, I'm toast, right? Yeah. If I stood up and said all the things that are in those 613 laws, you would look at me and go, are you whacked? No, I'm not whacked. That was for the Jewish people in the Old Testament. Jesus came and he said, let me give you one command. Lawyer says to him, he says, what's the greatest command? What did Jesus say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And then he said, and the second is like it, what? Love your neighbors yourself. Do you realize in John chapter 13, Jesus kind of wiped those out and he said, let's ratchet it up. I'll give you one command I want my followers to live by. One. Guys, he only said one. There's 613 back there. That was for the Jewish people. He said, I'll give you one. He says, you love people as I have loved you. And then he reiterates it right before this in John 15. He said, you love each other. And you love people as I have loved you. And here's what happens with so many of us. And here's what happened with me when I was younger. What I grabbed onto was all the different rules that were out there and all the different things and began to highlight all the differences. So what I thought my job was as a Christian was to stand up for all the issues. Make sure everybody was aware and understood what theology and scripture said about the issues and what Jesus would say about all the cultural issues of the day and even theological stuff. And guys, do you realize that is actually why we have so many denominations out there? Like thousands of them. Like we're not talking like a few thousand, we're talking like tens of thousands of denominations out there that all believe in Jesus, but they have divided over things that they see differences in. And they want to correct everybody else. And Jesus is back there going, hey, there's one thing. First thing is this, maybe it's a couple things. First thing in John 14, 6, I said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I'm God. You need to know that. And here's how I love, and I want you to love that way. And guys, what I missed as a young person, I would get in so many arguments with people. I would go to school and I'd try to correct people's behavior. I'd try to this and that. And you know what I found is there were so many people that were pushing away from me because what was I highlighting? I was highlighting the differences that we had with each other. You know what was a hard thing is that a few people called me on the fact that a whole lot of my activity and actions and behavior on the other side wasn't even matching up with what I was trying to hold people to on this side. And how many times do people look out and what do they say? There's a big problem with Christians. It is what? It's hypocrisy. Because we're just trying to claim and live up to this thing and saying, hey, here's how it's supposed to be. But we can't even live it on the other side ourselves. You see, being a standout Christian is not about arguing people to your faith. You will never, I will just make a bold statement and say this. You will never argue someone to your position or your faith. You can love them there, but you will never argue them there. Standing out for your faith is not this. It is not posting on social media all of your political beliefs and all, because you know what? Jesus would not have made those things part of the gospel. He would have said, here's the gospel. Paul said it. He said, the gospel is this. I preach Jesus Christ and him crucified, and that's it. Here's how you love. Here's how you care for people. Now, there is a time and a place to stand up for things, but we stand up for things in the context of relationships, not stand up in the context of arguments. Because you can't argue someone to Christ. You can't post somebody to Christ. I would say this, standing up for your faith is not beating people in your family up with 10 emails a month with all the things that you disagree with and saying, hey, see this thing? Hey, see this idea? Hey, see, here's another argument for this thing. You never reach anybody that way. Standing out for our faith is not highlighting differences. Standing out for our faith is highlighting Jesus and highlighting the way he loved and the way he cared. What I began to realize in my life is there was a point, even guys, all the way up through college. I realized it in college when I went to an ultra-conservative college, and all of a sudden I became the one that they were pointing fingers at all the time because I came from a certain church background. And I began going, hey, no, I'm the guy that's usually arguing. Why are you arguing with me and pointing fingers? And my wife ended up looking at me, and I've said this before. She said, you know, you've always been kind of harsh. You might better listen in this moment. And that began the journey of beginning to understand that what Jesus says about standing up for ourselves as Christians, about being a stand-up Christian, is highlighting more about what we're for than about what we're against. And that's the kind of church that we here at Rocky have decided we're going to be. Now, believe me, we stand up for truth. If someone asks, where do you stand on the issues? We say lovingly, here's how we stand on the issues. And we give a reason why. But here's what I love about how people who have disagreed with us have responded to us. They've said, you know what? I don't quite get it, what's different about Rocky, but here's the thing. I know that we disagree on some things, but I actually know that you're for me and that I'm accepted. And being accepted is different than just affirming what somebody believes. We can have differences about beliefs without persecuting people because they're different from us. Think about this for a second. Whoa, sorry. Just killed the next worship song, sorry. Think about this for a second. If you go back through church history, you will find a whole lot of times that Christians have been persecuted. But if you go back through church history, you will find a whole lot of times that Christians have been the persecutors of other people. And just because we don't see physical persecution that we see in so many different stories throughout the past, when we see more opposition that not just is coming against Christians, but Christians are putting against other people, is probably why we have some empty seats in our churches today. You see, the reality would be this, is God doesn't want us to stand out for how we're different from other people and how we impose our beliefs on somebody else. He wants us to stand out for how we love people. You want to know what a standout life would look like? A standout life would look like this. It would look like you and me going and building a relationship and a friendship with somebody who totally believes something different than we do. And if you're not in any place, I tell you this, I'm excited about my family. We're in all kinds of places right now where we just interact with, we have friendships with, we play ball with, sports with, do all this different stuff with people that believe something totally different. And the last thing I do is go tell them I'm a pastor. You just love people, and you let relationships develop, and you realize people realize that you're just a regular person too, struggling with some of the same things that they're struggling with too. Man, a standout life would be a life that goes out of its way to serve somebody that believes different than them. I heard a definition of greatness this last week. It was inconveniencing yourself in the service of others. A lot of times we'll do that for other people that believe like us, but we won't do it for people that are different than us. Man, that would be a standout life. A standout life for Jesus would be that you live a life that just replicates his love, his kindness, and his grace. But that love and kindness and grace is shown just like it was with Jesus. He didn't walk in and say, hey, I need to go talk to all the religious people and gather them up and make sure we all believe the same thing. He said, I didn't come from the healthy. I came for the sick. I came for people who don't know me. And Jesus didn't go out there and point out he went out there, he just loved. Man, that would be a standout life if everybody on your block was like, man, that person's a super cool person. And it's really weird because they go to church. Like they're way different than other people. Like maybe I should just get to know that person, and maybe, wow, I've met a few other people that they know that go to that same church. Maybe I should check out that because that's way different than what I've experienced before in my life. Man, I love the journey that we've been on as a family, that we've been on as a church, just to learn how to live and to love more like Jesus. That is our mission, to help as many people as possible know Jesus and love like him. Not like religious people, but like him. You know what would be a standout life? Because if you're gonna love that kind of way, you gotta fuel your life in some ways that feed that. You know what would be a standout life? Man, a standout life would be a person who put Jesus first in their life. That actually read the Bible and prayed daily. Do you know statistics say that they figured out over COVID that people who read the Bible daily decreased like depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts like by 40%. You should do that. You know what would be a standout life is people that said, you know what, I'm gonna make my decisions by putting Jesus first in my life. I'm gonna honor others the way Jesus would honor others. I'm gonna honor myself. Students, I'm gonna honor myself, my body, my heart, the way Jesus will want me to honor that. You know what would be a standout life? Exactly what our campus pastor said earlier, is committing to a place like this and showing up. Showing up with other believers, because you're gonna stand out from different from the world. You're gonna have friendships in the world, but you gotta have a place that keeps you accountable, that keeps you going, that keeps you encouraged, because there will be places and times where it's hard because you stand out, because you don't fit in. The average Christian right now, they come less than one out of 6 times. Man, that'd be a standout life if you came. That'd be a standout life if you committed, if we committed to a place like this and said, you know what, we're gonna be generous with our life. We're gonna give, we're gonna tithe. The world would look at you and say, dude, that's stupid. You know what you could do with that 10%? And Jesus would look at you and say, hey, you know what you could do with 90%? And a heart that's devoted to me? You know what would be a standout life? Is a group of people that walked out of this place, that came together every Sunday, that came together in small groups, that did all of that. But a group of people that walked out of this place and just loved like Jesus, and ended up, after they had relationships with people, told them why. I don't think there'd be an empty seat in either place. You see, that'd be a standout life. And I think for us, each and every one of us, no matter what your age is, I think you gotta choose, and you gotta ask yourself the question, am I just fitting in, or am I standing out? Am I just fitting in, or am I standing out? Because one way or another, you're not gonna get away with it. Like somebody's gonna recognize. It's gonna be the same thing for me, walking in that middle school class and like just trying to fit in. If you're trying to live like Jesus, it's just not gonna happen. You're either gonna recognize the world saying, oh man, they're like everybody else. Or you're gonna have Jesus and the world saying, no, they stand out, and they stand out for the right reasons. Church, man, let's be that. Let's be a place that stands out. And I actually believe then in this day and age, there's so much hunger for that. You will face less opposition. I think what you'll actually face is you'll face hunger, where people want what you have. And I think that's needed. Hey, we're going to wrap up, and here's how we're going to wrap up. Easter's coming next week, and there's some information you need to know. It is a great opportunity for us to fill these seats at both campuses, but I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to hand it over to your campus pastors, and then we're going to get out of this place. They're going to give you some info. We're going to get out of this place. You're going to invite some people, and we're going to go love like Jesus and stand out the way he wants us to.
Oh,
Let's
yeah,
pray.
because Jake's sitting right here.
Father, I just thank you so much for sending
we're gonna
Jesus
look
to
for
give us
Matt.
a picture of what it means to love, because if he didn't come, there'd be no picture for us. And Jesus, I pray for all of us that we would just kind of examine life today and say, what should we look like? How are we missing the mark? How should we be standing out? How should we just be acting normal and loving people and allowing them to see something different in our life? Father, I pray we will be the church in this area that stands out for loving like you. It's in Jesus' name we pray.
Ready to.
Amen.
And Kill
Amen.
Street.
All right, give me 90 seconds. We'll get
Go
you out of
to.
here. But today is Palm Sunday, which means next weekend is Easter
his
weekend.
title's
It's one of the biggest gatherings of
Keys
the
in.
year for our church. And
And then you want me to just
we've got
run
same
with
service times
Sure.
on Sunday, but we've added a Saturday night service because we know Sunday is just going to be slammed. There's going to be a lot of people here. And so here's the deal. If you're like, hey, what's one thing that I could really do to help out next week? And here's what you could do. You could come to Saturday night. That would help out a ton. And everyone who says yes to Saturday night is saying, is opening up a spot for more than likely a guest that's showing up because they don't know they need to come on Saturday. So they're going to show up on Sunday, and you're attending the most popular Easter service time, okay? 9:15 is going to be slammed in here. And so if you could, take one for the team and come on Saturday, it'll be awesome. We've got live teaching at every one of our services. The other thing that would be really helpful is if you could possibly even serve next week. I know guest services and our children's ministry team is looking for some more volunteers, and so that'd be awesome just to jump in. Again, just because we have so many guests, we want to serve them well and create an environment where we take out all the distractions and not just talk about the what of Easter, but also the why. And so it's going to be an awesome time. Can't wait to see you there. Guys, April 22nd, we've got a men's event happening down at Top Golf. I know many of you tried out for PGA Tour, didn't make it, and so we're just going to go there, hang out. Mike Sanford, who was the interim CU coach last year, is going to be talking a little bit. We're going to have breakfast, and then we're going to hit golf balls for 2 hours. It's going to be a lot of fun, so don't miss out on that. And today's the day. If you finished the grit challenge, if you went hard in the paint and you finished it, you can bring your card out to the table. There's a T-shirt.
I'm gonna pull the
Rock
key.
that T-shirt. Well done. All right, have a good rest of the day. We'll see you on Easter.
Ready, CG?
Bye-bye.
Okay.
And dissolve CG. Nicely done.
All
Andrew,
right.
thank you. Okay, another one's in the can.
All right.
See you guys in a bit.